Hey everybody, Trey here. Welcome back to another forecast discussion. It's been quite a while since we've done a forecast discussion. We are seeing a return to severe weather focused on tomorrow, Monday, November 20th, across the Gulf Coast states from East Texas into Louisiana and Mississippi. They have just issued a new SPC outlook with an upgrade to enhanced risk in the orange area here across the northern half of Louisiana into south central Mississippi. The upgrade was due to an increased confidence in strong tornadoes across this region. 10% hatched area has been introduced within that enhanced risk area, including places like Jackson, Mississippi, and areas to the west across northern Louisiana. Damaging wind also going to be a threat. 30% area introduced for the Mississippi River Delta into south central Mississippi, including the Jackson area. Large hail also going to be a threat. Going to be a little bit of on the back burner tomorrow in terms of the tornado threat and the wind threat being a little bit higher, but hail will be an issue, especially with storms early on in their life cycle out, especially to the east across East Texas into western Louisiana. So all hazards on the table for tomorrow. First real significant event we've seen in this secondary season. So let's go ahead and dive into the meteorology behind this event. Not sure I'm going to have time to do a video update tomorrow. Still haven't decided if I'm going to be chasing this event, but going to do a video today just so we have one out so we can get some ideas on the forecast as the models have come into a little bit more agreement with the solutions for tomorrow. So let's go ahead and get started. So we'll start out at 500 millibars, and you can clearly see right off the bat, this is our current SPC mesoanalysis at 500 millibars, and we can see this big old trough here across the western half of the country. This will continue to dig down as we go into the next day or so, and we'll start to see a shortwave develop across the southern plains and move off to the east or east-northeast into the Ohio River Valley vicinity by tomorrow. Strong flow about to round the base of this trough. You can see all this strong belt of flow here on the back side of the trough. That means it's still intensifying. Once we start to see that stronger flow rounding the base of this trough, we'll know that that trough is really intensifying, and that will take place tonight into tomorrow as we start to see that shortwave develop here across the southern plains. We'll see that shortwave take on a little bit more of a negative tilt, and that's when we'll really see the atmosphere become primed for significant severe weather across the Gulf Coast states tomorrow. Now, we'd expect, because we have very strong flow, westerly flow across the southern Rockies here, we would expect to see some semblance of lee cyclogenesis already in place, and that is exactly what has gone on. We see a nice surface low here developing across the Oklahoma Panhandle region, and that's started several hours ago and has continued into today. This low will continue to consolidate and move off to the east or east-southeast as we go through the day today into tomorrow. So very strong low-level response here, and as that trough in the upper levels becomes a little bit more negatively tilted, that shortwave breaks off, becomes more negatively tilted, we'll see this surface low and the low-level mass response really start to become enhanced across the, especially the Louisiana-Mississippi corridor by tomorrow afternoon, and that's when the tornado threat will maximize across that region. So very nice surface low here, very nice upper-level trough. We would also expect to see some low-level jet here, and we do see that very nice, well-defined trough here at 850 millibars, a nice belt of enhanced low-level flow here, 35, 40, 45 knots here from central Texas up to the north into South Dakota. So very nice broad swath of low-level jet. That will ramp up overnight, as it always does, and then it will die down a little bit during the day as we get a little bit of a reconsolidation of the surface low. We'll take a look at a little bit of model data here in just a second. But we will see that the low-level flow really start to enhance tomorrow afternoon again across Louisiana and Mississippi as that shortwave starts to take on a more negatively tilted orientation. So that's what's going on right now. We'll take a look at some model data in a second to show you how these features are going to progress. Let's see how our moisture is doing here at the surface. This is our current surface map. Yesterday, winds across Texas were out of the north, really keeping that moisture down here in the Gulf, but those have flipped around to the southeast and south over the last day or so, and we've started to see a return of those 60s dew points into Texas. We see 61 dew point almost up to the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex there, and basically south of this pink line there is this most robust moisture here. Now, if we go off to the east a little bit across the enhanced risk area for tomorrow, Louisiana, Mississippi still seeing dew points in the 30s, but again, that will change as that surface low in the Oklahoma Panhandle consolidates, moves off to the east. That low-level flow will continue to strengthen and be backed out of the south or southeast, pulling that moisture northward, and we should have no issues with moisture, at least low-level moisture, streaming into the area for tomorrow. And that's kind of what we saw for today, a little bit of an issue for today. There's a marginal risk out for today across Oklahoma. We were eyeing a little bit more of a robust threat over the last couple days for today, but that has since waned because we don't really have strong enough moisture, and we are socked in clouds here in Oklahoma today. So the threat for today has really minimized. Lack of overall moisture return, lack of instability. That is not going to be the case for tomorrow. We will see, even though we have 30s dew points across this area now, we will see a robust moisture return into this area as that surface low consolidates and moves east. That warm sector will be nice and wide for tomorrow across East Texas through Mississippi, even into western Alabama by tomorrow evening. So no issues with low-level moisture. Let's take a look at the quality of that moisture. We'll take a look at the 12Z Corpus Christi sounding, so 6 a.m. Central Standard Time this morning. I just want to take a look at the depth of this moisture. That is critical in these events. And you can see the red profile, again, is our temperature profile. Green profile is our dew point as we go up in the atmosphere. And this is a fairly moderate moist layer, if you will. Doesn't extend super high into the atmosphere, but is not very, very shallow, as we often see sometimes this time of year. We have nice moist layer up to about 850 millibars, so relatively deep moisture, and that is going to be a positive for severe weather tomorrow. That quality of the low-level moisture extends up in the atmosphere and is very, very nice. So we shouldn't have any issues as far as moisture transport and moisture quality going into tomorrow's event. All right, let's take a look at some model data now, and I want to preface a couple things before we go into this. We're only going to look at the 12Z NAM run from this morning. And so we're only going to look at one model in this video. All the models have come into very good agreement about these solutions for tomorrow. Over the past couple days, we've seen quite a bit of discrepancy in solutions. We might peek at the GFS and Euro here as we go through this video, but I'm going to focus on the NAM just for time's sake. And I want you to know that the NAM is a little bit farther west than the other solutions, but the idea is going to generally be the same. So all the stuff we talk about here, note that it will be a little bit shifted off to the east, most likely for tomorrow, and that the NAM is showing a very western bound to the severe threat for tomorrow. This solution definitely still could happen depending on the timing of the surface low and how it ejects into the southern plains. But just know that the NAM is definitely on the western edge of the guidance as far as the overall severe threat. The other models are a little bit farther to the east, so keep that in mind as we go through this, but that the idea that the NAM is showing over the overall progression of this event is very much in line with the other models. So let's go ahead and start out at 500 millibars here. We'll start out currently, and we see that nice big old trough here across the western half of the country. All that flow relegated to the backside right now. But watch as we go through the day today into tonight. You start to see that flow really start to round the base of this trough. The reds here indicative of 80 plus, 90 plus knot winds there. Rounding the base of that trough as it starts to dig down into the southern plains. And by tomorrow morning, we start to see a little bit of this flow, a little bit of a shortwave develop here out across the eastern half of this belt, overall belt of enhanced flow here. We go into the afternoon tomorrow, and you see that shortwave really starts to take on a negative tilt going into tomorrow afternoon and evening, as the exit region of this trough centered right over Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi there, and that will be our main area of forcing, synoptic scale forcing for ascent in this regime. Let's go down to the surface and see how this surface low develops. So you see here, currently, surface low centered across the Oklahoma Panhandle vicinity, southwest Kansas. That will continue to consolidate as that flow continues to traverse the Rockies here in the southern plains. That low will consolidate here a little bit off to the southeast going into tonight. Will be centered along the Red River tomorrow morning. This is at 18Z, so noon tomorrow. Surface low on the NAM, at least, centered across the Red River. Again, that may be a little bit farther west than what some of the other models are showing. But we should have a broad warm sector with this. You see the winds very much out of the south, and they will continue to be that way over the next day or so, really helping that moisture get northward. And I'm going to zoom in here to the southern plains sector so you can see. Right now, at least as this model was initialized this morning, just moderate moisture return here across the southern plains, upper 40s to low 50s dew points from central Texas northward, the 60s relegated here down in South Texas. But you can see as that low is consolidated here initially across the Oklahoma Panhandle vicinity, and those winds have turned out of the southeast and south, we started to see those 60s dew points really surge northward by this evening. They should be almost up to the Red River. We'll continue to see that as we go into tomorrow morning. Nice, robust moisture, 60 dew points all the way up into southern Oklahoma, out across East Texas. And so we won't see at least those 60s dew points reach Louisiana and Mississippi by tomorrow morning, but they will quickly surge northward as that that upper trough starts to take on a little bit more of a negative tilt, we'll see the low-level mass response in turn strengthen as well, and that will really start to bring those 60s dew points northward. Probably by late morning into lunchtime tomorrow, you see by 18Z noon Central Standard Time, 60s dew points all the way up into northern Louisiana, and by 21Z, 3 p.m. Central Standard Time, all of Louisiana encompassing those 60s dew points, with even those 60s reaching south central Mississippi. Very wide warm sector you can see here. At least, again, the western bound here, this is our cold front associated with the surface low. This is a little bit farther west than what some of the other models are showing. But nonetheless, all the models are showing a very wide warm sector. Here's going to be our warm front. Somewhere in here, surface low centered along the Red River. So a very broad warm sector. And these broad warm sectors tend to be of concern in the southeast. Oftentimes you'll see a very pinched, narrow warm sector. Not a lot of room for supercells out in the open warm sector. But because we have such a broad area of high quality, low level moisture, we have a very broad warm sector, and thus we'll have a lot of room for there to be significant supercell development out in the open warm sector. We will have development along the cold front initially, and probably fairly early on, if I might add here, just before we move on. Notice how the forcing starts to really take shape here across this region. We start to see that belt of flow entering the northeast Texas, the Arklatex vicinity by 9Z. This is 3 a.m. Central Standard Time. So we'll likely have a lot of convection here across Oklahoma and Arkansas, maybe even the Arklatex and far northern Louisiana in the overnight to early morning hours. North of the warm front will mostly be elevated. Chance for some sporadic severe hail, nothing too intense at all. No tornado threat with those storms. We could see some rumbles of thunder and some marginal hail here across this area because of the forcing entering this region going into the overnight hours, plus the strong warm advection overrunning that warm front will also be a forcing mechanism for those elevated storms. Now, as we go into the morning, we'll start to see that forcing as well already start to take shape across this region. You see the defluence aloft. Technically, we're not supposed to use the 500 millibar level to diagnose divergence aloft. Again, the defluence aloft, the spreading apart of those wind vectors. But you can see here that we do have a nice defluence here across this area. That will, again, we've talked about this before. Defluence aloft, the spreading apart of those winds, creates a void. Mother Nature doesn't like that void, so it brings up air from below to fill that void, and that's how we get large-scale rising motion for ascent in a given event. That's exactly what we have going on here. But notice, this is at noon tomorrow, and we've already got nice defluence across this region as the nose of that upper level jet here starts to move into the Arklatex vicinity in East Texas. So we should see storm development fairly early tomorrow, perhaps as early as late morning, 9, 10, 11 a.m. We'll start to see storms increase in coverage across East Texas ahead of the cold front. And that will be our initial storm development here. And then once the forcing moves across the warm sector here by mid-afternoon or so, we could see additional development across the open warm sector from north central Louisiana and central Louisiana into the Mississippi River Delta area. So a couple different regimes here, kind of a mixed mode setup here, but of note, across East Texas especially, we will see an early start for storm initiation tomorrow. But back to the surface here, and I want to again outline the warm sector here. This is going to be at 21Z, so this is going to be at 3 p.m. Here's our cold front, surface low located here somewhere along the Red River in southeast Oklahoma. Warm front draped across southern Arkansas into northeast Louisiana there. So again, a very broad warm sector. And what I like to do with these broad warm sector events where and to look if prefrontal supercells are going to be a possibility is look for little confluence bands in the open warm sector. So a product I like to use for that is the 850 millibar relative humidity product, which also has streamlines on it. These blue lines with the arrows on them, basically just showing the direction of the flow. And you can see here across the warm sector, especially across far east Texas into northwest Louisiana, you can see those streamlines coming together here in this vicinity. That is perhaps some semblance of a confluence band or a low-level front, mid-level front, or something of that nature, which is well ahead of the main synoptic cold front. And that could be a focus for storm development here by mid-afternoon or so across far east Texas into the northern half of Louisiana. We'll have to watch that for sure. And if I take this away, we'll go down to the surface as well and see if we can see anything in the surface winds in the warm sector. So again, here's our main surface low centered across the Red River, cold front back here, warm front here. Notice here in that very same area, the winds here across East Texas are very much veered out of the southwest, But across western Louisiana, the winds are very much more backed out of the south or even south-southeast here across north-central Louisiana. So very much identifying a confluence band, at least in the NAM solution here. So that is going to have to be watched very closely. Any supercells that fire on that will have a tendency to be a little bit more discrete because of a little bit less forcing compared to the cold front back out to the west, and therefore we could see a little bit more of a discrete nature to any supercells that fire here. And again, as the low-level flow ramps up in the afternoon, those will have the greatest threat of producing significant tornadoes. And speaking of the low-level flow, let's go ahead and take a look at the 850 millibar flow here and how it progresses throughout the day. I'll keep it zoomed in on the Southern Plains sector here. So you can see the low-level jet moves off to the east ahead of the low-level cyclone here into the overnight hours. Going to ramp up in the overnight and then kind of weaken as we go into the morning. A little bit of an area of 30 to 40 knots or so of flow here across East Texas into Louisiana, but we don't really see a huge ramp up in the low-level flow until late afternoon. We start to see a little bit more of those bright yellows. That indicates a little bit stronger flow. And then especially going into the evening hours. This is at 3Z. So about 9 p.m. Central Standard Time, you see the reds there. That means 50, 60 plus knots of flow there across the Mississippi River Delta, eastern Louisiana, into Mississippi. Any supercells interacting with this stronger low-level flow will have a chance to produce significant tornadoes. And that will include any storms along the cold front, any embedded supercells in there. Again, that will be more of a linear mode as we have stronger forcing along the cold front. So more of a linear organization of the storms along the cold front, but could see a few mesovortices spin up or even some embedded supercells within there produce tornadoes. And we'll again have to watch for any open warm sector development out in here from late afternoon in through the nighttime hours, especially across eastern Louisiana into Mississippi, where that low-level jet really starts to ramp up. And any discrete supercells will have the chance of producing significant tornadoes. All right, let's go and take a look at a few soundings here across the region. We'll start out at 18Z because I want to show you the progression of soundings here across the progression of this event. So let's take one here across East Texas, where storms will initially fire out ahead of the cold front at 18Z. So this is about noon Central Standard Time, and you'll see what we have going on here. Instability not going to be super strong going into the morning hours, late morning, early afternoon hours. And you'll notice that the low-level flow really is not all that strong at all. Some of the models, some of the NAM solutions some of the past NAM solutions have shown a little bit more robust instability here. So that is something to note. But still, this is adequate given strong kinematics at play, 60 knots of effective bulk shear, so certainly plenty of deep layer shear for supercell development. So early on, those storms will have a tendency to become supercellular, attain rotation. But again, they will not have much of a tornado threat early on, especially out to the west, closer to the cold front, because we just don't have the wind profiles there for tornadic supercells. You see not much directional shear in the low levels. We want to see that veering of those low-level winds with height, and we don't really see that. Very much veered low-level winds all the way up through the atmosphere, really. And so very unidirectional wind profiles for the most part, not super favorable for tornadoes early on. But let's go ahead and go to 21Z, so 3 p.m. I'll take one here out across East Texas once again, and I'll take one across a little bit farther to the east across the warm sector in Louisiana. So this is East Texas, and you see still marginal instability, very unfavorable profiles for tornadoes out to the west, closer to the cold front. Much different story out to the east, across the open warm sector. A little bit stronger instability as well, over 1,300 joules per kilogram of mixed layer CAPE, 78 over 66 there. Very juicy low-level air mass, deep moist layer extending up to about 850 millibars or so. So deep, high-quality moisture there, decent instability, and our wind profiles are much more favorable for tornadic supercells out here in the open warm sector, even by 3 p.m. when our low-level jet really isn't maximized as it will be going into the early evening hours. We do see nice curvature there in the low-level flow. Surface winds much more backed here and lots of veering of those low-level winds with height from southerly to more of a southwesterly component at 700 millibars and above. So very nice curvature in the photographs. Any discrete supercells, again, especially those that form across that prefrontal trough that we identified on the NAM solution, will have to be watched for a tornado threat as early as mid-afternoon or so, as we have very nice curvature there in the low-level photographs, strong deep layer shear as well for supercells. And of note, we have very strong streamwise vorticity in the low levels. This was mentioned as well in the SPC outlook that just came out. Streamwise vorticity, again, is when we take our storm relative wind vector from our storm motion to our level of interest on the hodograph, and we compare that to our horizontal vorticity vector, which is to the left and perpendicular to the hodograph. When these vectors are parallel, we have streamwise vorticity. You can see they are almost perfectly parallel here, pretty much through the entirety of the low levels. We'll take one here up at about 1 kilometer or so, and look at the streamwise vorticity, and you can see very much parallel to each other there as well. So very strong, almost purely streamwise vorticity going up through the lowest few kilometers of the atmosphere. That is certainly favorable for tornadic supercell. Streamwise vorticity, I've always likened it to an NFL quarterback throwing a football with a perfect spiral. It's already that spin is already oriented in the right way, very much easier for the wide receiver to catch. Same thing with streamwise vorticity. Those vortex tubes, those horizontal vortex tubes that are ingested by supercells, they're already oriented properly. They're already spinning the right way. They're already oriented properly, so the supercell doesn't have to do much to take that from supercell, from horizontal convective roll or an area of horizontal spin into the vertical to become a tornado. Tornadogenesis is definitely favored when you have strong streamwise vorticity. So certainly of concern there across the open warm sector. And let's go to 0Z. This will be 6 p.m. Central Daylight Time. So let's take one here out to the west once again, closer to the cold front, and we'll take one here out across eastern Louisiana as well. So once again, very unfavorable look for tornadoes back to the west. Any more discrete convection back to the west would have a hail threat, strong deep layer shear for supercells, weak low-level shear, and so we'll have to watch that for hail, especially back out to the west. But look at that, my goodness. Instability here on the NAM, definitely on the weaker side. I wouldn't take that too much into consideration. Again, with such strong kinematics in play, we don't need a ton of instability. And this may be just a NAM quirk here, but you can see, once again, very deep moisture. The NAM, again, does tend to be a little bit too cool at the surface, 72 degrees. That could be on the low side, but we'll have to just watch that. But very juicy, low-level air mass. Assuming we have enough instability, take a look at that hodograph. This is at 0Z, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, and my goodness, this is about as favorable as it gets, especially in the low levels, for strongly tornadic supercells. Over 450 meters squared per second squared of effective storm relative velocity. Extremely, extremely strong veering of those low-level winds with height from southeasterly, very back to low-level flow, to southwesterly here at about 1 kilometer or 2 off the surface. So very nice veering of the low-level hodograph. Low-level winds with height leading to strong clockwise curvature of the low-level hodograph. And again, very pure, almost purely streamwise vorticity in the low levels here, all the way up through the low levels. That is about as classic as it gets for strong tornadoes here. I'll take a couple of points here just so you can see how purely streamwise this vorticity is. That is about as favorable as it gets for strongly tornadic supercells. So any discrete convection here in the open warm sector is going to have to be watched extremely closely, as that is going to have the greatest threat for producing strong tornadoes. And even going into the overnight hours, that may continue. That warm sector stays broad going into the overnight hours, especially into Mississippi here, south central Mississippi. I'll just take a sounding here across Mississippi, and we'll take one here to the south as well across the New Orleans area. We will have a very strong low-level jet in play at this time. You can see even some pink in there, 70 plus knots of flow there across northern Mississippi, so extremely strong low-level flow, and you can see very favorable look for strongly tornadic supercells, even going into the overnight hours across southern Louisiana, southeast Louisiana, into Mississippi, and even western Alabama, perhaps going into the early morning hours on Tuesday. So quite the favorable look here, especially across the open warm sector. We're going to have to watch very closely to see if any warm sector convection fires. And looking at the NAM, it does appear that we will have a chance for that, given that we will have that nice confluence band or prefrontal trough out in the open warm sector by mid-afternoon. Once again, another view at it here. Winds out of the southwest across East Texas, more backed here across Louisiana, out ahead of that surface low. Very much looking like some sort of prefrontal confluence or prefrontal trough out ahead, well out ahead in the open warm sector. That could be of very high concern for tomorrow for open warm sector discrete supercells. Let's take a look at some cams. Again, we always take these with a grain of salt this far out. Cams are not very good until about the day of the event. We'll look and just see what the cams are showing, just to give us at least an estimate of what the radar might look like going into tomorrow. So you can see a lot of storms, rain and storms here across Oklahoma into Arkansas overnight as the initial forcing arrives and that warm advection continues north of the warm front. Not too much here in the way of warm sector convection, so that is always of concern here in these southeast setups. We often have a lot of convection in the open warm sector in the morning. that tends to thwart instability a little bit and negate the overall severe threat. But we don't see a lot of that here, at least on the HRRR model. But we do see, again, early initiation across East Texas. This is at 14Z. This is 8 a.m., and we're already starting to see thunderstorm development here across East Texas there. And that will continue to spread northeastward going into the late morning hours into lunchtime, spreading into northern Louisiana. And you can see these little bands here feeding up on that strong southerly flow, that strong warm advection off the Gulf. And these confluence bands will have a tendency to produce, potentially produce discrete supercells with a strong tornado threat moving into the afternoon. You see the main band here along the cold front, lots of stuff here along and north of the warm front. We do see some storms out here in the open warm sector. Again, those would be the main concern for the significant tornado threat. Going into the overnight hours, a broken band of semi-discrete supercells here, especially with southern extent across southern Louisiana into south central Mississippi, would have a strong tornado and damaging wind threat, and then more of a congealed look as we go into the morning hours across Mississippi into Alabama. Let's take a look at the WRF ARW model here. Just another model that we like to analyze going ahead of an event. And you can see a lot of rain and storms there across Oklahoma and Arkansas going into the morning. Not much across the warm sector, which is favorable for storms. And you can see we do see a little bit of activity here by about noon across East Texas into northern Louisiana. Not as much as the HRRR was showing for sure. And this is quite the favorable look for significant tornadic supercells. You can see here very much discrete supercells here along basically the I-20 corridor there in northern Louisiana with a helicity streak there. So this model in particular showing discrete supercells with strong rotation in the updrafts moving into the Mississippi Delta by 6 p.m. or so. These would have certainly a strong tornado threat, and this is definitely a much more frightening look than what the HRRR was showing. We continue that into the overnight hours into Mississippi and Alabama. Let's look at the NSSL WRF model now, just another CAM we like to look at. Lots of stuff again across Oklahoma and Arkansas going into the morning hours. Early initiation here, even back across central Texas by 16Z, 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. So this is definitely probably on the western end of the guidance as well, just like the NAM, showing it well back here across central into north central Texas, perhaps into the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. For the DFW Metroplex, your threat is going to be well off to the east. So don't want you to be too concerned with tomorrow's event. The main threat will be well off to the east, maybe an isolated severe storm or two if we get this western solution to verify. But most likely well off to the east of you, so not too much to worry about in your neck of the woods for tomorrow. Those storms intensify along the cold front, and you again see these little beans, as I like to call them, out here in the open warm sector, feeding northward on that warm advection, and that will be certainly of concern for a tornado threat. You can even see some stuff here, embedded supercells, embedded semi-discrete supercells here along this broken line in northern Louisiana. Very much in the same vein as the WRF model, which the NSSL WRF model was showing. The ARW model was showing of strong supercells here moving into this area, very strong low-level shear and storm relative helicity, broken band of supercells here in Louisiana going into the early evening hours. That will have a significant tornado threat for sure. And then more of a congealed look going into the overnight hours into Mississippi and Alabama. So we'll keep it at that. That is going to close things out for this video, and you can see that the CAMs are very much in agreement with the solution for tomorrow. Initial development here across East Texas, with potentially additional development in the open warm sector out here across East Texas into Louisiana, with a strong tornado threat there before things congeal a little bit going into the overnight hours in Mississippi and Alabama. So a very robust event on tap for tomorrow again. Tomorrow is Monday, November 20th. We have an enhanced risk level 3 out of 5 in the orange area here across northern Louisiana, including the I-20 corridor in northeast Louisiana to Jackson, Mississippi. You are under the gun for the greatest threat for severe weather tomorrow. The greatest threat is going to be for significant tornadoes. We have a 2% and 5% extending here into East Texas. Again, I think the tornado threat will be limited here across East Texas, and especially the farther west you go, as the low-level shear just is not quite there for tornadoes across this area. But here across northern Louisiana into south central Mississippi, certainly favorable as that low-level jet ramps up in the late afternoon to early evening hours. There will be a quick ramp up in the threat for significant tornadoes, especially with any discrete supercells across this area. Wind threat also, especially going into the overnight hours as those storms congeal into more of a line across the Mississippi Delta through south central Mississippi, including Jackson, 30% area there for strong winds. Large hail, again, not going to be too much of a threat tomorrow. Will be more of a threat out west, especially across East Texas, where the low-level shear profiles are not quite that favorable for tornadoes. Instead, that does favor a little bit more severe hail. Instability is going to be at play as well, seeing very weak instability on the NAM. Again, I'm not going to take too much stock into that. Given strong low-level warm convection and at least broken cloud cover across this area, we should have enough destabilization to support robust updrafts. Strong deep layer shear for supercells will support a hail threat with any more isolated convection there closer to the cold front. Out here to the east, as low-level shear ramps up, I don't think we will see a significant hail threat develop. We will probably see a transition from hail to tornado threat as those storms move into Louisiana, especially as that low-level shear ramps up. That will negate the hail threat and increase the tornado threat. So all hazards on tap for tomorrow. I know a lot of people may be traveling here for Thanksgiving that is coming up this week. If you are traveling here along the I-20 corridor, especially even the I-10 corridor here, New Orleans to Lake Charles and east toward Houston, keep an eye out for tomorrow. We could see some robust storms. Very likely that we see robust storms across this area, so keep those weather radios handy, keep your eye on the sky, and we'll get through this event tomorrow. But very potent event, so everyone stay safe out there this Thanksgiving week. So thanks for watching, we'll see you in the next video.